Censor and Avenger by Ginzberg. Helpfulness and compassion do not paint the whole of the character of Elijah. He remained the stern and inexorable censor whom Ahab feared. The old zeal for the true and the good he never lost. As witness, he once struck a man dead because he failed to perform his devotions with due reverence. 63. There were two brothers, one of them rich and miserly, the other poor and kind-hearted. Elijah, in the garb of an old beggar, approached the rich man and asked him for alms. Repulsed by him, he turned to the poor brother, who received him kindly, and shared his meager supper with him. On bidding farewell to him and his equally hospitable wife, Elijah said, "May God reward you. The first thing you undertake shall be blessed, and shall take no end until you yourselves cry out enough." Presently the poor man began to count the few pennies he had, to convince himself that they sufficed to purchase bread for his next meal. But the few became many, and he counted, and still their number increased. He counted a whole day, and the following night, until he was exhausted, and had to cry out enough. And indeed it was enough, for he had become a very wealthy man. His brother was not a little astonished to see the fortunate change in his kinsman's circumstances, and when he heard how it had come about, he determined, if the opportunity should present itself again, to show his most amiable side to the old beggar with the miraculous power of blessing. He had not long to wait. A few days later, he saw the old man pass by. He hastened to accost him, and excusing himself for his unfriendliness at their former meeting, begged him to come into his house. All that the larder afforded was put before Elijah, who pretended to eat of the dainties. At his departure, he pronounced a blessing upon his hosts. "May the first thing you do have no end, until it is enough." The mistress of the house thereupon said to her husband, "That we may count gold upon gold undisturbed, let us first attend to our most urgent physical needs." So they did, and they had to continue to do it until life was extinct. 64. The extreme of his rigor Elijah displayed toward teachers of the law. From them he demanded more than obedience to the mere letter of a commandment. For instance, he pronounced severe censure upon Rabbi Ishmael ben Hosea because he was willing to act as bailiff in prosecuting Jewish thieves and criminals. He advised Rabbi Ishmael to follow the example of his father and leave the country. 65. His estrangement from his friend Rabbi Joshua ben Levi is characteristic. One who was sought by the officers of the law took refuge with Rabbi Joshua. His pursuers were informed of his place of concealment. Threatening to put all the inhabitants of the city to the sword if he was not delivered up, they demanded his surrender. The rabbi urged the fugitive from justice to resign himself to his fate. "Better for one individual to die," he said, "than for a whole community to be exposed to peril." The fugitive yielded to the rabbi's argument and gave himself up to the bailiffs. Thereafter Elijah, who had been in the habit of visiting Rabbi Joshua frequently, stayed away from his house, and he was induced to come back only by the rabbi's long fasts and earnest prayers. In reply to the rabbi's question why he had shunned him, he said, "Dost thou suppose I care to have intercourse with informers?" The rabbi quoted a passage from the Mishnah to justify his conduct, but Elijah remained unconvinced. "Dost thou consider this a law for a pious man?" he said. "Other people might have been right in doing as thou didst, thou shouldst have done otherwise." 66. A number of instances are known which show how exalted a standard Elijah set up for those who would be considered worthy of intercourse with him. Of two pious brothers, one provided for his servants as for his own table, while the other permitted his servants to eat abundantly only of the first course. Of the other courses they could have nothing but the remnants. Accordingly, with the second brother Elijah would have nothing to do, while he often honored the former with his visits. A similar attitude Elijah maintained toward another pair of pious brothers. One of them was in the habit of providing for his servants after his own needs were satisfied, while the other of them attended to the needs of his servants first. To the latter it was that Elijah gave the preference. 67. He dissolved an intimacy of many years' standing, because his friend built a vestibule which was so constructed that the supplications of the poor could be heard, but faintly by those within the house. 68. Rabbi Joshua ben Levi incurred the displeasure of Elijah a second time, because a man was torn in pieces by a lion in the vicinity of his house. In a measure Elijah held Rabbi responsible, because he did not pray for the prevention of such misfortunes. 69. The story told of Elijah and Rabbi Anan forms the most striking illustration of the severity of the prophet. Someone brought Rabbi Anan a mess of little fish as a present, and at the same time asked the rabbi to act as judge in a lawsuit he was interested in. Anan refused in these circumstances to accept a gift from the litigant. To demonstrate his single-mindedness, the applicant urged the rabbit to take the fish and assign the case to another judge. Anan acquiesced, and he requested one of his colleagues to act for him because he was incapacitated from serving as a judge. His legal friend drew the inference that the litigant introduced to him was a kinsman of Rabbi Anan's, and accordingly he showed himself particularly complacent toward him. As a result, the other party to the suit was intimidated. He failed to present his side as convincingly as he might otherwise have done, and so lost the case. Elijah, who had been the friend of Anan and his teacher as well, thenceforth shunned his presence, because he considered that the injury done the second party to the suit was due to Anan's carelessness. Anan in his distress kept many fasts, and offered up many prayers, before Elijah would return to him. Even then the rabbi could not endure the sight of him. He had to content himself with listening to Elijah's words without looking upon his face. 70. Sometimes Elijah considered it his duty to force people into abandoning a bad habit. A rich man was once going to a cattle sale, and he carried a snug sum of money to buy oxen. He was accosted by a stranger, none other than Elijah, who inquired the purpose of his journey. "I go to buy cattle," replied the would-be purchaser. "Say it if please God," urged Elijah. "Fiddlesticks, I shall buy cattle whether it please God or not. I carry the money with me and the business will be dispatched." "But not with good fortune," said the stranger, and went off. Arrived at the market, the cattle buyer discovered the loss of his purse, and he had to return home to provide himself with other money. He again set forth on his journey, but this time he took another road to avoid the stranger of ill omen. To his amazement, he met an old man with whom he had precisely the same adventure as with the first stranger. Again he had to return home to fetch money. By this time had learned his lesson. When a third stranger questioned him about the object of his journey, he answered, "If it please God, I intend to buy oxen." The stranger wished him success, and the wish was fulfilled. To the merchant's surprise, when a pair of fine cattle were offered him, and their price exceeded the sum of money he had about his person, he found the 2 purses he had lost on his first and second trips. Later, he sold the same pair of oxen to the king for a considerable price, and he became very wealthy. 71. As Elijah coerced this merchant into humility toward God, so he carried home a lesson to the great Tana Eliezer, the son of Rabbi Simon ben Yohai. This rabbi stood in need of correction on account of his overweening conceit. Once, on returning from the academy, he took a walk on the sea beach, his bosom swelling with pride at the thought of his attainments in the Torah. He met a hideously ugly man, who greeted him with the words, "Peace be with thee, Rabbi." Eliezer, instead of courteously acknowledging the greeting, said, "O thou wight, 72, how ugly thou art! Is it possible that all the residents of thy town are as ugly as thou?" "I know not," was the reply, "but it is the master artificer who created me that thou shouldst have said, 'How ugly is this vessel which thou hast fashioned.'" The rabbi realized the wrong he had committed, and humbly begged pardon of the ugly man, another of the protean forms adopted by Elijah. The latter continued to refer him to the master artificer of the ugly vessel. The inhabitants of the city, who had hastened to do honor to the great rabbi, earnestly urged the offended man to grant pardon, and finally he declared himself appeased, provided the rabbi promised never again to commit the same wrong. 73. The rigor practiced by Elijah toward his friends caused one of them, the Tana Rabbi Hosea, to accuse him of being passionate and irascible. As a consequence, Elijah would have nothing to do with him for a long time. When he reappeared and confessed the cause of his withdrawal, Rabbi Hosea said he felt justified, for his charge could not have received a more striking verification. 74.